10 football stadiums that no longer exist. Part 5. PARKSTADION. The former home of FC Schalke from 1973 till 2001. Plans came about in the 1960s for Schalke to have a larger stadium, and it was in 1967 that the Council of Gelsenkirchen gave the go-ahead for the stadium to be built, mainly for the purposes of the 1974 World Cup. The stadium opened on the 4th of August 1973, with the first ever match taking place in a friendly between Schalke and Feyenoord. It held a capacity of 62,004 spectators, with 45,000 of those seated. During the 1974 World Cup, the stadium held 5 group matches, including the biggest win recorded at a World Cup to date, as Yugoslavia defeated Zaire 9-0. The stadium also held 2 UEFA Euro 1988 matches, as well as the first leg of the 1997 UEFA Cup final between Schalke and Inter Milan. Schalke played their last match here on the 19th of May 2001 in a Bundesliga fixture against SP VGG Unterhaching with around 65,000 in attendance before the club moved on to the Arena of Schalke in July of the same year. The stadium fully closed its doors in 2008 and is now partly demolished, though large areas still remain, while the Jumbotron from the northern stand is now installed at the Erzgebirgsstadion, the home of FC Erzgebirge Aue. HUSEYIN AVNI AKER Stadium. Opened from 1951 until 2017, the stadium was the home of Turkish club Trabzonspor. It opened with a capacity of 2,500, but eventually was increased after numerous renovations and settled at 24,169. Azerbaijan used the stadium for their UEFA Euro 1966 qualifying, with all 5 of their home games being played here, though they did go winless, and attendance was poor, with a maximum of 2,000 people attending. With Trabzonspor's growth as a club, they moved on to a larger capacity stadium, the Şenol Güneş Sports Complex, in December 2016. The last game played here was on the 26th of December 2016, a 3-0 loss for Trabzonspor against Fenerbahce, before closing its doors in 2017. HARDTURM. The stadium was built in 1929 and was first used by Grasshopper Club Zurich from then until 2007. Originally it held over 27,000 people, but it was downsized to 17,666 in 2007. Walter Scholler bought the land for the stadium, who then passed it on to the Grasshoppers free of charge. Capacity sat at 38,000 in the 1980s, but due to seating requirements it was heavily reduced. The stadium held 5 games during the 1954 World Cup, most notably involving a 9-0 win for the Hungary team against South Korea. Floodlights were installed on the 11th of April 1956, with HARDTURM becoming the first stadium in Switzerland to have them. The last game to be played at the stadium was a Swiss championship match between Grasshoppers and Xamax. Grass and seats were taken by fans as souvenirs, while a film of Grasshoppers highlights in the stadium were played on the video walls. Grasshoppers enjoyed lots of success here, winning 20 championships in the process. The stadium was closed and demolished a year later, with construction of a new stadium to be built where the HARDTURM stood. Since then, Grasshoppers moved on to the Letzigrund, sharing a stadium with rivals FC Zurich. Currently the space is empty until the new stadium is built. HIGHFIELD Road. Built in 1899, this iconic stadium was home to Coventry City until 2005, when the club moved on to the Rioch Arena. It held an all-seater capacity of 23,489, and the well-loved stadium was situated in the heart of one of Coventry's communities, apparently being able to see into people's homes between stands. The stadium was the first all-seater in the English leagues, but all seating was abandoned when Leeds United fans tore apart seats after losing 4-0 in 1981. It wasn't until 1993 the stadium returned to an all-seater due to the Hillsborough disaster that made it a requirement for all top division clubs. The record attendance came in 1967, in a Football League Division 2 game between Coventry and Wolves, which saw an attendance of 51,455. In 1999, Coventry were given the go-ahead for a new stadium, with Highfield Road lacking the facilities compared to modern stadiums. The last match played here was on the 30th of April 2005, in a Football League Championship game that saw Coventry beat Derby 6-2. Shortly afterwards, Elton John held a concert at the stadium, and demolishing work began in February 2006, lasting a month. The site was used to provide housing where the car parks and stands stood, while grass was relaid on the playing surface to allow for the continuation of football on that space. Plough Lane. The stadium was home to Wimbledon FC for almost 80 years, between 1912 and 1991. It held 15,876 people as an all-seater, while at its maximum it reached 30,000 just before World War II. The first match played at the ground was a 2-2 friendly game between Wimbledon and Carshalton Athletic on the 7th of September 1912. Damage during World War II caused a lot of redevelopment as the South Stand was bombed, and collections at half-time were taken to keep the club operating. The stand was restored in 1950, which saw a capacity of around 25,000, and floodlights came to the stadium in 1954. Due to the requirement of all-seater stadiums by the early 1990s, the board decided that Plough Lane couldn't be economically redeveloped any further to meet the standards, with modernisation proving difficult and expensive. Wimbledon moved on to share a ground with Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park for the 1991-92 season. While the deal was only meant to last a few seasons, it eventually lasted 12 years. Once Wimbledon left, the stadium was regularly used for both Wimbledon and Crystal Palace reserves until 1998, when the stadium was sold to supermarket chain Safeway. Due to objections, Safeway gave up plans to build a supermarket on the stadium site in 2002, and the stadium was demolished during the summer with the site sold on for flats to be built. Development of the flats was completed in 2008, with the site now named Reynolds Gate after former Wimbledon player Eddie Reynolds. 6 blocks were also renamed after former players, manager and a chairman. For Wimbledon FC, they now play their games at the new Plough Lane, situated 200 yards away from the old site. VETCH Field. The stadium opened in 1912 in Swansea, Wales, and was the home of Swansea City from 1912 to 2005. It held a capacity of 30,000 at its peak, while only a capacity of 11,475 near its end. The first stand built in 1912 was the centre stand, and it held 1,500 people before going through numerous changes, ending up as long as 3/4 of the pitch. The West Terrace became the away section, and it held a strange feature that was only found at Wembley Stadium also, in which people could walk under the pitch. The North Bank stand became home to the majority of supporters, with the most vocal sitting here, while the East stand was home to bizarre floodlights that was out of character compared with the rest of the stadium. The final league game played at the VETCH was a 1-0 win against Shrewsbury Town on the 30th of April 2005, with Adrian Forbes grabbing the last goal. The last ever game came shortly after, with an FAW Premier Cup final game between Swansea and Wrexham in a 2-1 win for Swansea. After the match, many souvenirs were taken, with seats, turf and advertising boards taken home by fans. It closed its doors on the 11th of May 2005 and demolition began on the 31st of January 2011. Swansea City moved on to the Liberty Stadium, but the VETCH continues to be missed by Swansea fans as it held more atmosphere. Stadio Nazionale PNF. Opened in Rome, Italy on the 10th of June 1911, with a seating capacity of 47,300, the stadium was the home of Lazio from 1931 to 1953 and Roma from 1940 to 1953. Named after the National Fascist Party, the stadium underwent renovations in 1928 for a game between Italy and Hungary. It held 3 games at the 1934 World Cup, including the semi-final and final. The first of those was a round of 16 game that saw the Italians destroy the USA 7-1. Czechoslovakia defeated West Germany 3-1 in the semi-final, but it was home for Italy as the Italians went on to lift the World Cup trophy here with a 2-1 win against Czechoslovakia after extra time in front of a crowd of 55,000 people. It shut its doors in 1953 and was later destroyed in 1957, with Stadio Flaminio taking its place. Stade GRIMONPREZ-JOORIS. Built in Lille, France in 1974, the stadium was home to Lille OSC from 1974 until 2004. It held a capacity of 21,128. A friendly match between Lille and Feyenoord officially opened the stadium on the 28th of December 1975, in a game that ended 1-1. The stadium was renovated in the year 2000 to meet FIFA regulations and safety standards, but the stadium still failed to meet those standards, which meant Lille had to play their European games at the Stade Félix Boulard. In 2002, plans were made to redevelop the stadium to a UEFA standard, which would have taken the capacity to 33,000. But the club's new owners instead opted for a new 60,000-seater stadium to be built. The last match played here was a 2-0 win for Lille against SC Bastia in Ligue 1 on the 15th of May 2004, with the stadium closing its doors after the match. The stadium stood unused until 2010, when demolition began in March of that year. RHEINSTADION. Built in Dusseldorf, Germany, close to the Rhine in 1926. Fortuna Dusseldorf was there from 1953 until 1970, and again from 1972 until 2002. It could accommodate 54,000 spectators, but attendance went beyond that at the 1974 World Cup and the 1988 European Championships. During the 1974 World Cup, the stadium held 5 matches, with attendance reaching over 67,000 for a couple of those games involving West Germany. The 1981 European Cup Winners' Cup final was played here on the 13th of May 1981, when Dynamo Tbilisi defeated Carl Zeiss Jena. Attendance was poor for the match, with only 4,750 people showing up to watch the final. West Germany returned here for a game in the 1988 Euros, drawing 1-1 with Italy, while the only other game at those Euros played here was a 3-1 win for Netherlands over England, with almost 64,000 attending. The stadium closed on the 22nd of June 2002 and was demolished on the 6th of November 2002, with the Merkur-Spiel Arena taking its place in 2004. KIROV Stadium. Opened in 1950, the stadium was part of a project to rebuild St. Petersburg after World War II. The stadium is named after Soviet politician Sergei Mironkovich Kirov. It was home to FC Zenit St. Petersburg from 1950 until 1992, and initially held 100,000 people, while having an all-seater capacity of 84,000. The first match played here was on the 30th of July 1950, in a game between Zenit and Dynamo St. Petersburg, in a 1-1 draw. For a game on the 14th of July 1951 between Zenit and CSKA Moscow, temporary stands were put in place to increase capacity to 110,000, with the stadium selling out and setting a record for Soviet football. It underwent reconstruction to host football games at the 1980 Summer Olympics and the last major international event here was the 1994 Goodwill Games. Zenit left in 1992, but the stadium remained in use for football games until the 2006. Zenit did return to play here once more on the 6th of July 2006 in a game against Dynamo Moscow, with parts of the stands already uninstalled due to the planned demolition, but still 45,000 people sold out the stadium. Officially, the last game came on the 17th of August 2006 as FC Petrotres lost 3-0 to Spartak Shelkovo, and the stadium was demolished in September of that year, with a new Kristovsky Stadium built on the site in 2017.